Brent Dalton thought he ruled Ridgeway High until he poured fruit punch on the wrong kid. The quiet boy didn't fight back. He just looked up once, and somewhere outside, a Rolls-Royce engine started. Within days, Brent's car was wrecked, his secrets leaked, and his name whispered like a curse. The new kid never raised a hand, but every hand that touched him vanished from power. And when his father finally walked into the cafeteria, cane in hand, the entire school forgot how to breathe. This isn't a story about revenge, it's about inheritance. If you want more stories where silence becomes the loudest weapon, subscribe and share. Monday came gray and humming. Ridgeway High smelled of wet pavement and punch. Trays clattered, chairs scraped, the cafeteria buzzed. Then the east doors opened and a thin boy in a gray hoodie walked in, gold pendant bright against cotton, moving like the noise didn't apply to him. He took a tray, chose rice and chicken, and sat by the windows facing the parking lot. Outside idled a black Rolls-Royce, glossy as oil. Beside it stood a man in a black suit, older, square-shouldered, a cane held lightly as if it were a habit, not a need. His eyes never left the glass. Students glanced, guessed rich parent, and forgot. The boy didn't forget. Every few bites, his gaze drifted to the reflection and back. His name was Luca Valenti. No one knew it yet. To Ridgeway, he was new kid, transfer, nobody. He ate alone, elbows close, eyes calm, never turning his back to the room. He seemed small the way a folded knife seems small. Brent Dalton arrived with the second lunch wave, Letterman jacket loud as a drum line. The R on his chest flashed like a badge. He was big and relaxed in the way of someone used to rooms making space. People called him the Rhino. Once he charged, explanations followed wreckage. Teachers sighed. Freshmen studied their food. He spotted Luca, quiet, alone, chain glinting. Brent drifted toward the window table, trailing 2 linemen, a backup quarterback, and a cluster of phones. The room's noise thinned. "Yo, hoodie," Brent said, planting a hand on Luca's chair. "You're in my seat." Luca looked at the empty bench across from him and slid his tray an inch to make space. He didn't speak. Restraint felt like disrespect to someone who lived on reactions. Brent hooked a finger under the pendant and flicked it so it rang against bone. Cute necklace. Participation trophy? Luca lifted his eyes, steady, impatient. "Eat," he said softly, and moved the tray again, as if the problem were geometry. Laughter. Phones rose. Brent took the plastic cup from Luca's tray and tipped it. Punch spread across the table. Luca folded his napkin and absorbed the spill in patient strokes. "Not listening," Brent sing-sang, and poured a second cup over Luca's head. The liquid pattered through hair, pinked his lashes, and dripped into his food. The room hissed. Several someones filmed. Luca didn't leap, curse, or plead. He set the empty cup upright like a man tidying a crime scene. He blinked away the sting and kept breathing. Outside the glass, the suited man lifted his chin. The cane touched asphalt once. Tick. And stilled. Brent leaned close enough that Luca felt soda-sweet breath. "You deaf?" I said, "Move." Silence pressed in. Ridgeway had rules. When the Rhino charged, keep your distance. Don't be the lesson. Luca rose. He wasn't tall. He didn't square up. He carried his tray to the trash, rinsed his hands until the water ran clear, dried his fingers, and returned to the same seat. An answer that sounded like no answer at all. Brent's smile wobbled, then hardened. "You got anything to say?" "I'm eating," Luca said. The words were pebbles, small and heavy. They slid into the room and settled. The kids nearest the table edged their chairs back a half-inch. Outside, the rolls idled. Inside, the soda machine hummed. Luca picked up his fork. Brent tapped 2 fingers against Luca's hair and strutted off, harvesting laughs that didn't ring as bright. On the linoleum, red drops gleamed. No one noticed the principal pause in the doorway, see the car, and schedule courage for later. No one noticed the janitor crack the far door, take one look, and retreat. Luca finished the chicken, left the beans, folded the napkin with practiced precision, and studied the room as the bell neared. Exits, sight lines, distances. He wasn't afraid. He was making a map. Outside, the suited man answered a call without looking away from the window. He endured, he said. Yes, sir. As requested, he closed the phone and tapped the cane twice. By last period, story had split. In one version, the new kid cried. In another, he muttered threats in Italian. In a third, he smiled. The common details were the cup turned upside down like a plastic crown and the Rolls-Royce that watched without blinking. Across campus, the head coach told the principal Brent was high-spirited. The principal said he'd look into it. Teachers said it was handled. When the last bell rang, wind rose and the air smelled like rain. The Rolls had gone, but space it left felt underlined. Luca walked home by the long way. A black sedan idled 2 blocks behind and never gained or lost distance. Beyond town, a man with silver in his hair listened to a report in a quiet room. He said to the dark glass, "Ben, respect is earned." Night laid its hand over the city. The video gathered hearts and laughing emojis. Brent reposted. Somewhere a locker combination changed without warning. Morning would bring a wrist halted by a grip colder than law and a rumor hardened into certainty. Morning would bring the first real choice. But before any of that, there was this. A quiet boy with a measured gaze, a bully convinced the room was his, and a black car that had watched the scene like a judge in a private court. That is where Ridgeway's story begins, and where the backstory of Luca Valenti and why a man with a cane stands watch starts to unfold. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. And trust me, the best part is yet to come. Now let's get back to it. The cafeteria incident lived longer than it should have. By Tuesday morning, it had already turned into a story, one that kept changing shape with every retelling. In one version, Luca cried. In another, he threatened Brent in Italian. Some swore they saw his eyes flash red, like in a movie. The only constant detail was the Rolls-Royce outside, the one nobody could explain. But the truth was simpler. Luca didn't say a word. He just went to class. That silence made people uncomfortable. Fear would have been easier to mock. Tears would have given them closure. But silence? Silence made people imagine. By the second day, the whispers had become a sport. Brent's crew, the football players and their satellites, took it personally that their king's display hadn't drawn blood. They made it their mission to correct that. They started small. A shove in the hallway. A mistaken elbow in gym. A tray swapped out for one with spoiled milk. Brent called it tuning the ghost. Luca absorbed every hit like weather, expected, passing. He didn't report it. He didn't retaliate. He just moved differently. When someone shoved him near the lockers, he never stumbled. When his pencil was flicked from his desk, his hand darted out before it hit the ground. His reflexes were too clean, his control too practiced. It wasn't bravado, it was precision. A few students noticed, quiet ones, observant ones, the type who spent more time watching than talking. "Guy moves like he's in a movie," one whispered during lunch. "Or a soldier," another replied. But Brent didn't care about whispers. He wanted a reaction. That's what power was to him. Proof that someone else could still flinch. By midweek, Ridgeway's halls had turned into a stage. Brent would pick his moments carefully, just loud enough to draw attention, just cruel enough to keep dominance intact. He'd trip Luca in the hallway, laugh, and then make sure to help him up in front of teachers. He'd sit in Luca's seat 5 minutes before class and say, "Oh, my bad, new kid, didn't see your name on it." When Luca didn't respond, he'd lean closer, voice low and poisonous. "You too scared or too stupid to talk?" Still, nothing. That restraint frustrated Brent more than any insult could have, because power means nothing if the other person refuses to acknowledge it. On Thursday, during gym, it almost escalated. Coach Simmons had divided the class into pairs for boxing drills. Brent grinned when he saw Luca's name opposite his own on the attendance sheet. "Fate," he said, cracking his knuckles. The class circled up, gloves on. Brent towered over him, smirking. Luca's hoodie was gone, replaced by the school's plain gray t-shirt. His frame was leaner than it looked, taut, coiled muscle under quiet skin. The whistle blew. Brent lunged. Luca stepped aside, barely moving. It wasn't even a dodge. It was geometry. Minimal distance, maximum control. "Lucky," Brent grunted, swinging again. Luca ducked, shifted left, and tapped Brent's shoulder with an open glove. Just once, precise, a mark, not a strike. Coach laughed. "Hey, looks like the new kid's got moves." Brent's pride lit up like dry paper. His next punch came wild, heavy, desperate to prove something. Luca didn't dodge this time. He raised an arm, deflected the blow at the wrist, and let Brent's momentum carry him off balance. Brent stumbled, caught himself, and glared. "Enough," the coach barked, stepping in. Luca lowered his gloves without a word. Brent's jaw flexed. He wanted to continue, but the coach's whistle ended the round. That afternoon, the rumor evolved again. The quiet new kid could fight. And that scared them more than anything else. By Friday, Ridgeway was watching Luca differently. He'd become a ghost story, an urban myth wearing sneakers. Students stepped out of his way. Some out of respect, most out of caution. Brent's crew tried to double down, but even they hesitated. Something about Luca's stillness unsettled them. That night, while Ridgeway slept, the man from the Rolls-Royce sat parked beneath a flickering streetlight across from the school. He had been seen 3 times that week, always at a distance, always alone. He wasn't a chauffeur, not really. The cane was a disguise. The way he scanned exits, checked mirrors, adjusted posture, it was a soldier's rhythm. His name was Silvio De Luca, though no one at Ridgeway knew that. They just called him the Man in Black. He watched as janitors turned off the lights one by one. Then he dialed a number on his encrypted phone. "He's being tested," he said in Italian. A pause. "Tested?" A voice echoed through static and smoke. "Yes, Don Vittorio." On the other end, the sound of a lighter, a click, a breath. "Then let him be tested." Silvio nodded once, as if the Don could see it, and ended the call. In the Valenti estate, miles away, past iron gates and the scent of pine, Don Vittorio Valenti sat in his study surrounded by silence. The walls were lined with old photographs, men in suits, families at tables, a younger version of himself with a boy no older than 7. On the desk sat an ashtray carved from marble. The cigar's ember glowed like a small, dying sun. "He's growing," he murmured, watching the smoke coil upward. "But strength without patience is noise." He glanced at the photograph. Luca, at 10 years old, standing beside a chessboard, smiling faintly. "Let's see what kind of man you choose to become, figlio mio." Saturday morning came quiet and bright. Luca jogged to the empty football field before sunrise. The air was cold, the grass slick with dew. He started stretching, methodical, precise. Breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. Foot pivots, shadow strikes, movements too controlled for someone his age. Every motion was built on something older, discipline that came from years of private lessons, endless drills, and the sharp voice of his father echoing through memory. Control the breath, Luca. Control the room. He stopped, exhaled, and stared across the field toward the tree line. A shape moved there, a silhouette in black, watching. Luca didn't startle. He just nodded once. The man nodded back and vanished into shadow. The test wasn't over. It was just beginning. By Monday, the atmosphere at Ridgeway had changed again. Brent still laughed, still strutted, but less convincingly. His friends followed his lead, but their laughter had edges now. Forced. Luca, meanwhile, kept to his pattern. Quiet, calm, observant. He moved through the halls like someone walking underwater, everything slower, muted, distant. Yet every time Brent pushed too far, something intervened. A locker door that suddenly jammed. A teacher who appeared just before another accident. A rumor that Brent's father had been contacted by someone important. Little things, invisible hands nudging fate. The breaking point came in the locker room on Wednesday. Brent, frustrated beyond reason, kicked Luca's gym bag into the showers and turned on the water. The others laughed, recording. Luca stepped forward, picked up the drenched bag, and placed it on the bench. "Funny?" he asked quietly. The room went still. Brent opened his mouth, but the words caught. Something in Luca's tone, or maybe his eyes, made the laughter die. Luca looked at him for a long moment, then walked out. No threats, no retaliation, just silence that felt heavier than any punch. That night, Silvio made another call. "He's holding back," he reported. On the other end, Don Vittorio chuckled, a low, approving sound. "Good," he said. "If he wanted to, there'd be no school left." The line went dead. Silvio lit a cigarette, watching the school lights from his car. He thought of the boy's calm eyes, the way he never flinched even when soaked, mocked, cornered. He thought of the Don's words. Then he smiled faintly. "He's not holding back," he murmured. "He's calculating." Back at Ridgeway, Luca sat by the dorm window, watching the moon glint off the parking lot. His phone buzzed once, a message with no name, only a single line. "They've crossed the line." "Do I intervene?" he typed back. "Not yet." He set the phone down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow was Thursday, and Brent Dalton had no idea that the game he thought he was winning was already being played on Luca's board. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It helps more people discover stories like this one. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, take a deep breath, because what happens next will change everything. The lunch bell sounded like a warning that no one could hear. Trays clattered, sneakers squeaked against the linoleum, and laughter filled the cafeteria in waves. The air smelled of fries, sweat, and the faint hum of bad decisions. Luca sat in his usual place, by the window, the same table where the last incident had occurred. He ate slowly, methodically, as though every bite was part of a ritual. Across the room, Brent Dalton stood with his crew, his hand wrapped around a paper cup of red fruit punch. He wasn't laughing like the others. His smile was stretched too wide, his eyes too cold. The sting of last week's whispers hadn't faded. It was eating him alive. "Yo, Rhino," one of his friends said, nudging him. "You gonna let him keep acting like that didn't happen?" Brent's jaw tightened. "Nah," he said. "Today we fix that." He turned, scanning the room, his gaze locking on Luca's quiet figure by the window. The boy was alone, again. Always alone. That gray hoodie, that same stillness, like he didn't belong to this noisy, ordinary world. Brent hated that calm, hated that he couldn't shake it. The crowd followed him as he started toward Luca's table. the sound of phones unlocking and recording filling the air like a swarm of insects. Luca didn't look up. He knew. He'd felt that shadow long before it reached his table. But he didn't move. Brent stopped beside him, his Letterman jacket stretched tight across his shoulders, gold chains glinting under the cafeteria lights. The smile on his face wasn't joy. It was performance. "Didn't your mommy teach you manners, new kid?" Brent said loudly, voice dripping with mock pity. A few nearby tables went silent. Heads turned. The cameras zoomed in. Luca lifted his eyes slowly. "I don't talk during meals," he said, his tone quiet but steady. That answer made Brent laugh. Too loud, too forced. "Oh, you don't talk? You too good for us now?" He reached across the table and, with one sharp flick of his wrist, knocked Luca's drink over. The red punch spilled across the tray, dripping onto the floor. The crowd gasped. Luca didn't move. He looked at the spreading stain, at the sticky river inching toward the edge of the table, and calmly reached for a napkin. He began to clean. Careful, almost gentle. Brent's smile faltered for half a second. Then he grabbed another cup from a nearby table. "Maybe you need a refill," he said. Before anyone could stop him, he tilted the cup and poured it over Luca's head. The cafeteria exploded. Gasps, laughter, the chorus of phone cameras clicking in rhythm. The red liquid streamed down Luca's hair, over his face, soaking into his hoodie. He blinked once. Outside, behind the glass, the black Rolls-Royce gleamed under the pale afternoon sun. The man in the suit, Silvio, stood beside it, motionless. Only his hand moved, lowering his sunglasses to reveal cold, watchful eyes. The slightest frown formed, like a ripple across still water. Inside, Luca's jaw tightened. His fingers, resting on the table, curled once, then released. His breath slowed. Every muscle in his body screamed to move, to end this, but discipline had been drilled into him since childhood. "Control the room. Don't let the room control you." Brent leaned down, his grin returning now that the crowd was laughing again. "You gonna cry, new kid?" he whispered, voice low, testing him. Luca's eyes lifted. Calm. Focused. The kind of calm that made Brent's laughter stall mid-breath. "No," Luca said simply. He stood, water dripping from his sleeves, and looked at the tray. Slowly, he righted the cup that had fallen, placed it upright on the table, and sat back down. Then he picked up his fork and continued eating. The laughter faltered. The room didn't know how to respond. Someone whispered, "What the hell?" Another muttered, "He's insane." Brent forced out a laugh, too loud. "Yo, you see this? He's a robot. Dude's broken." But the words didn't hit the way he wanted. The laughter that followed was thinner this time, hesitant. He turned to his crew for backup, but their smiles were uneasy now. The power had shifted, just slightly, but enough to make him feel it. Luca chewed quietly. His face was unreadable, his eyes distant. For him, the humiliation wasn't new. He'd been trained to withstand worse. Pain, fear, mockery. A cafeteria full of teenagers didn't compare to a childhood of steel discipline and shadowed lessons whispered under threat of consequence. Outside, Silvio's phone buzzed once. He lifted it, answering in Italian. "It's done," he said softly. "Yes." He stayed calm. A pause. The voice on the other end was gravel wrapped in silk. "Good," Don Vittorio replied. "Let the wolves bare their teeth. Soon they'll learn who's been watching." Inside, Brent slapped the back of Luca's head as he walked away, trying to reclaim the attention slipping from him. "Clean yourself up, ghost boy," he muttered. Luca didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. The silence that followed him out the door was heavier than any punch. As soon as Brent left, the cafeteria came alive again, but not the same way. The laughter was forced now, the chatter nervous. The footage was already being edited, captioned, shared. But for everyone who watched, the most disturbing part wasn't the bullying. It was Luca's stillness. That calmness. It wasn't weakness. It was something else. Something trained. By the end of the day, the video had reached every corner of Ridgeway. Comments poured in, some mocking, some defending, most confused. Why didn't he fight back? Bro just sat there like he's planning a massacre. Look at his eyes, man. That's not normal. Luca didn't read them. He didn't have to. He knew how the game worked. The loudest people were always the weakest. The real power didn't shout. It waited. He sat on the bleachers after school, the sunset staining the sky orange. The field was empty, quiet. The wind carried faint echoes from the cafeteria windows, the same place where the whole thing had begun. Behind him, Silvio approached. No words at first, just the crunch of his shoes on gravel. You kept control, the bodyguard said finally. Luca didn't turn around. That's what he wanted, to see if I'd break. And your father? Luca glanced at the horizon. He already knows. Silvio nodded once, the faintest sign of approval. He's proud. Luca exhaled, slow and even. He shouldn't be. Silvio tilted his head. Why? Because pride makes men careless, Luca said, and careless men don't live long. For a moment they stood in silence, the sound of the wind between them. Then Silvio stepped back. Then what happens next? Luca's lips curved. Not a smile, not yet. I wait, he said. They'll make their next move soon. The next morning, Brent swaggered into the hallway like nothing had changed, but he could feel it. Eyes followed him differently now, some curious, some cautious. When he passed Luca by the lockers, he smirked, forcing confidence. Still here, huh? Guess I didn't scare you off. Luca looked at him briefly, calm, unreadable, and said, You never did. That quiet reply stuck with Brent longer than he cared to admit. For the first time, the laughter in his throat didn't come. He didn't know it yet, but something inside him had already cracked. And outside, the black Rolls-Royce waited by the curb, its engine silent, its passenger watching. The storm hadn't arrived. Not yet. But everyone in Ridgeway could feel it forming. Slow, steady, unstoppable. By the next morning, Ridgeway felt heavier. Not in the way of bad weather or exams, but in the quiet weight that falls when something unseen shifts the air. Conversations dropped when certain names were mentioned. Laughter came out thinner. Eyes moved quicker toward doors and shadows. The first sign came before the first bell. Brent Dalton's car, his pride, his spotless black Mustang, sat crooked in the student parking lot, the hood defaced with words carved deep enough to bear the metal beneath. Respect is earned. The letters were clean, deliberate, not vandalism born of impulse but of message. Whoever did it had taken time. Too much time for courage to be random. By second period, the photo was everywhere. Students whispered across hallways, their phones half hidden behind textbooks. Some said it was revenge for the cafeteria. Others swore they'd seen someone in black standing by the lot before dawn. Brent said nothing. His silence did what his fists never could. It made people scared for him. During lunch, it got worse. When Brent yanked open his locker, a cloud of photos spilled out like falling cards. Dozens of printed shots, some taken from social media, others from God knows where. His fights, his victims, every humiliation he'd ever filmed or bragged about. His face in every one, mid-punch or mid-laugh, proof of every cruel thing he thought the world had forgotten. Someone had gone digging. Deep. Bro, who did this? One of his teammates muttered. picking up a photo. His voice trembled. Brent's breathing hitched. Whoever it is, they're dead. But his words lacked conviction. Because this wasn't the work of a scared student or a vengeful teacher. This was precise, surgical. Someone wanted to dismantle him, not break bones, but reputation. And at Ridgeway, reputation was the only currency that mattered. By mid-afternoon, the teachers received anonymous envelopes in their mailboxes. Each one contained the same thing: printouts of Brent's messages, screenshots of fights he'd coordinated, notes he'd written bragging about making kids earn their silence. No sender, no handwriting, no traceable source. Principal Harris shut his office door for the rest of the day. No one saw him leave, but the blinds stayed shut, and the school rumor mill declared him shaken. Out in the parking lot, the black Rolls-Royce was back. Silvio stood beside it, his usual calm posture now wrapped in quiet purpose. He carried a brown envelope in his hand, thick, sealed, marked with nothing. When the principal emerged through the side exit, looking like a man whose world had just begun to tilt, Silvio met him halfway. A brief conversation. No raised voices. Just a gesture. The envelope passed from one hand to another. Harris looked at the envelope as though it burned. "What is this?" Silvio's tone was polite, smooth, the way a blade might sound if it could talk. "Information. I believe you'll find it clarifying." Then he smiled, nodded once, and returned to the car. The principal didn't open it until much later. But when he did, the blood drained from his face. Inside were the same photos that had fallen from Brent's locker, only more detailed, annotated, dated. And at the bottom, one line written in neat black ink. A lesson in respect. Meanwhile, Luca's day looked no different from any other. He walked to class alone, read during lunch, and disappeared for hours after school. No confrontations, no outbursts, no visible interest in the chaos swirling around him. That night, when the gym was supposed to be empty, he was there, barefoot on the polished floor, hoodie sleeves rolled to the elbows, shadowboxing under the dim light of a single ceiling lamp. Every movement was controlled, fluid, the way he pivoted, the way he exhaled between strikes. There was precision there, not born from anger, but from training that had no room for emotion. He stopped after 10 minutes, hands still, breath steady. For a moment he listened, to the hum of the air vents, the creak of the bleachers, the faint thud of his own heartbeat. Silvio watched from the doorway, unseen. His expression softened just slightly. "He remembers," he whispered to himself, before turning away. By the next morning, the rumor had evolved into something far larger than the truth. The new kid's dad runs something big. The car outside belongs to his family. He's not just rich, he's protected. His father's dangerous. It spread faster than gossip, faster than logic. Students deleted videos of the cafeteria incident. The ones who mocked him now avoided his path. Even teachers glanced at him with a mix of fear and respect they couldn't explain. Brent walked the halls tight-jawed, pretending not to notice how the same kids who used to laugh at his jokes now stared with cautious pity. Luca passed him once near the science wing, their shoulders nearly brushed. Brent froze, bracing for some silent taunt or smirk. But Luca didn't even look at him. He just walked past, eyes forward, calm as ever. That silence, the absence of any acknowledgement, cut deeper than any word. In the teacher's lounge, Principal Harris held a meeting. His voice was low but urgent. "I don't want this school turning into a circus," he said. "No more videos, no more fights. Whatever's happening with that boy, let it end here." "But who's behind this?" one teacher asked. He looked out the window towards the parking lot. The Rolls-Royce sat there, black and still, its driver waiting like a statue. "I don't know," Harris said, "and I don't want to." That evening, As the last students left the building, Brent found his locker empty. Every photo, every scrap of evidence, gone. Only a single note remained, taped neatly to the inside. Balance restored. He crumpled it, but his hands shook. For the first time in his life, Brent Dalton understood what it felt like to be the hunted. At the same time, in the quiet study of the Valenti estate, Don Vittorio poured himself a drink and looked out over his garden, the phone pressed loosely to his ear. "Progress?" he asked. Silvio's voice was calm on the other end. "He endures." They break themselves trying to touch him. He doesn't lift a hand, but the balance shifts anyway. The Don smiled faintly. "He's learning restraint, then?" "Yes, sir." "Good," said Vittorio, "because if he ever stops restraining himself, there won't be a school left to teach the lesson." He ended the call, raising his glass toward the window. The city lights flickered like dying stars beyond the trees. At Ridgeway, the wind rattled the flagpole under a cold dusk. Luca left the gym last, pulling his hood up as he walked into the empty street. Behind him, the Rolls started its engine, a low growl that barely disturbed the quiet. As it followed at a respectful distance, Luca didn't look back. He didn't need to. The wolves had finally begun to understand, and in their understanding, fear was taking root. Deep, invisible, permanent. The day began with a storm that hadn't reached the sky yet. The air felt thick, restless, like the world was waiting for something to break. By third period, Ridgeway High was already pulsing with tension. Every glance toward Luca carried a question. Every whisper felt like it hid a warning. Brent Dalton hadn't slept. His locker vandalized, his car marked, his reputation cracked. Each insult gnawed at him like fire under his skin. His friends had started to pull away, scared of the silence that followed wherever Luca went. Brent hated that silence more than anything. He saw Luca by the lockers, sliding a book into his bag, calm as ever. The hallway buzzed with voices, but in Brent's mind, everything narrowed to that single figure. The boy who'd refused to flinch, refused to acknowledge him, refused to lose. His fists clenched. "You think you can mess with me?" he barked. Luca turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Excuse me?" "Don't play dumb," Brent snarled, stepping closer. "You and your freak friends think this is funny? My car? My locker? You think I don't know who's behind it?" Luca's tone stayed level. "You think too much." That answer hit like a slap. The crowd watching held their breath. Brent's face twisted. "Say that again." But Luca didn't. He didn't even blink. He just stared back, and for the first time, Brent felt it. The pressure of something colder, sharper, heavier than his own rage. Then he reached forward, ready to shove. Before his hand even touched fabric, another hand caught his wrist mid-air. The hallway fell silent. The man from the Rolls-Royce stood between them, tall and still, his black suit sharp against the pale light. His grip wasn't violent, just absolute, a kind of control that didn't need to shout. Brent tried to pull away. He couldn't. The man's voice was calm, almost gentle. "My employer's son doesn't like trouble," he said, eyes fixed on Brent. "Neither do I." The words were simple. The tone was final. Brent's throat went dry. Who the hell are you?" The man's gaze didn't waver. "Someone who ends trouble before it begins." The grip loosened, just enough for Brent to step back. His friends froze in place, too stunned to move. No one said a word. And then the man turned his attention to Luca. For the first time, something like softness entered his expression. "It's time to go, signorino." Luca nodded once. "Yes, Silvio." Brent caught that name. Silvio. He said it like someone who served kings. As they walked away, Brent stood there, pulse hammering. The students who'd gathered pretended to return to their lockers, but the story was already alive, spreading faster than any fight could. By the time the final bell rang, the rumor had shape. The man in black wasn't a bodyguard. He was Mafia. Luca's father wasn't rich. He was untouchable. And Brent? He'd just grabbed the air of someone people whispered about in headlines, not classrooms. That night, thunder rolled over the city like the echo of a warning. Rain fell steady against the windows of Luca's small room. The walls were bare, the light dim. His phone buzzed once on the desk. He didn't need to check who it was. He answered quietly. "Papa." The voice that came through was deep, smooth, and slow, each word carrying the weight of a man who'd never needed to raise it. "Do I need to visit this school, mio figlio?" Luca hesitated. "No, Papa. I'll handle it." There was a pause. He could hear the faint clink of glass, the slow exhale of cigar smoke. "You've been patient," Don Vittorio said. "I can tell. But patience is not weakness. Remember that." "I know." "Good. Because the moment you lose control, you lose power." Luca's eyes shifted toward the rain streaking down the window. "They think they can humiliate me," he said softly. "They don't know what I could do if I wanted to." "Then don't want to," the Don replied. "You are my son, Luca. The blood of men who built empires runs in you, but what makes us feared is not our strength, it's our restraint." Lightning flashed, illuminating his reflection in the glass. Cold eyes, calm face, rain sliding down like veins of silver. "I understand, Papa." There was another pause, softer this time. "Good boy," the Don murmured. "Silvio says you've been watched closely. He says you move with discipline." "I learned from the best," Luca replied. A faint chuckle through the static. "Flattery doesn't suit you. But pride does. I'm proud of you, figlio mio. Handle this quietly. When men see calm where they expect chaos, they begin to fear you without understanding why." The line went silent for a moment, then clicked off. Outside, thunder rolled again, low and distant. Luca placed the phone down and exhaled slowly. His reflection looked older than his years, shaped by lessons that didn't belong in a teenager's world. He'd spent his life balancing two identities, the son of a king and the student of normalcy. And now those worlds were colliding. He walked to his closet and pulled out a towel, drying his hair absent-mindedly. Then, almost unconsciously, he opened the drawer beside his bed. Inside was a small wooden box. Inside that, an engraved silver ring bearing the Valenti crest. He turned it between his fingers, the weight of it grounding him. That ring wasn't jewelry. It was a declaration, a reminder of who he was and what silence could command. Across town, Brent sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his swollen wrist. It wasn't bruised badly, but the ache went deeper than muscle. Every time he tried to forget the man's eyes, he couldn't. The way he'd looked at him, unmoved, unreadable, certain, it had hollowed him out. He opened his phone and scrolled through the new posts flooding the Ridgeway group chat. "That guy's definitely Mafia." "Bro, Brent messed with the wrong family." The Rolls-Royce dude literally handed something to the principal. "I heard his dad's in Italy running some kind of organization." Brent's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he didn't know how to defend himself. Every instinct he had, control through fear, dominance through noise, suddenly felt useless. The silence that followed Luca wherever he went had reached him, too. At Ridgeway, Silvio's car idled under the rain, headlights off. Through the windshield, he watched the school building fade into darkness. His phone buzzed once. "Status?" came the Don's voice. "All contained," Silvio said quietly. The boy handled it with composure. No outburst, no retaliation. Good, Vittorio replied. Then let them fear the calm. Yes, Don. When the call ended, Silvio glanced at the window of Luca's room in the distance. The light was still on. He could see the silhouette of the boy standing by the glass, unmoving. Lightning cracked again. Silvio smiled faintly. You've inherited more than your father's blood, ragazzo, he murmured. You've inherited his shadow. He stepped into the rain, coat collar turned up, and disappeared into the storm. Inside, Luca slipped the silver ring onto his finger for the first time. The metal was cold, heavy. He looked at his reflection once more. The boy who had entered Ridgeway a stranger was gone. In his place stood someone who could silence a room without speaking, someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the war had already begun. By midweek, Ridgeway High had turned into a rumor factory. Every hallway buzzed with whispers that slid from ear to ear, twisting facts into something far more dangerous than truth. What began as cafeteria gossip had metastasized into legend. Some said Luca Valenti's family owned half the city. Others claimed his father ran an Italian crime syndicate that made people disappear without leaving shadows. A few insisted the Rolls-Royce parked outside the school was armored, that the man in the suit wasn't a driver at all, but a killer assigned to watch the dawn's only heir. The story changed with every voice, but the ending stayed the same. Don't mess with the new kid. Phones glowed in dark corners, screens replaying the same footage, the moment Brent tried to grab Luca, and the man in black stopped him cold. The clip had been uploaded, re-uploaded, slowed down, dissected frame by frame. Students captioned it with names like The Hand of the Dawn and When Silence Hits Harder Than Violence. No one laughed anymore. Even the teachers started acting different. When Luca entered a room, their tones softened. When he asked a question, they said, "Of course, Mr. Valenti." Even Principal Harris, who had spent 2 decades commanding respect through sheer authority, avoided his gaze. The day after the hallway incident, he'd addressed the entire staff with one instruction: keep things peaceful. No confrontations, no mistakes. Peaceful was the wrong word. Ridgeway was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the quiet before a quake. Brent Dalton, once the loudest noise in every corridor, had become a ghost of himself. His friends had stopped sitting with him at lunch. They claimed they were giving things space, but Brent knew fear when he saw it. He caught them whispering near the vending machines, their eyes flicking toward Luca, as though he could hear them from across the room. By Thursday, his confidence had eroded to anger. He tried to act normal, to laugh, to throw an arm around a teammate, but nobody laughed back. His name no longer carried weight, it carried warning. The humiliation wasn't just social, it was structural. The hierarchy of Ridgeway had rearranged itself overnight. The bully who once ruled through fear now trembled under it. The quiet boy who used to vanish into the background had become the still point around which the school revolved. And the most unnerving part was that Luca hadn't said a word. That afternoon, Luca sat in the library beneath a shaft of gray light filtering through the high windows. His posture was relaxed, a book open before him, but his eyes weren't moving across the page. They were listening. Every sound mattered. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights, the hushed conversations between tables, the nervous breaths of those who realized they'd wandered too close to him. From behind the reference shelves, 2 sophomores whispered in panic. "I heard his dad's people came to talk to the principal." "No, bro, I heard they paid him off." "Paid him off?" "Dude," the principal called him sir. "Who does that?" Luca turned the page. The boys fell silent. He didn't even look up, yet his presence alone seemed to still the air around them. It wasn't power through threat. It was power through knowledge. through silence that everyone else filled with their own imagination. By evening, the whispers had left the school and invaded the city. Parents called the office demanding to know if it was true that a mob boss's son was attending their children's classes. Local blogs posted blurry photos of the Rolls-Royce under headlines like, "Mystery family tied to Ridgeway's golden boy?" Luca didn't check the internet. He didn't need to. The world was reacting exactly as expected. He had been taught since childhood that people fear what they can't define. Don Vittorio always said, "Never explain. Let them choose the story that frightens them most." That night, Luca trained again in the gym, long after the building emptied. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and varnish. His hoodie hung from the bleachers while he moved across the floor in silence, each motion clean, precise, like a man translating discipline into breath. His movements were fluid but sharp, not anger but refinement. Every pivot, every strike had a memory behind it, the echo of his father's lessons, Silvio's corrections, the cold voice that had shaped him into someone who could remain calm even when humiliated. He paused between sets, breathing evenly, and glanced toward the door. Through the small glass window, Silvio watched from the dark hallway. He gave a slow nod, barely perceptible, then vanished. The next morning, Ridgeway was no longer a school. It was a stage set on edge. Students walked in clusters, glancing over shoulders, whispering without moving their lips. The tension was contagious. 2 freshmen got into a fight near the cafeteria line. One shoved the other and shouted, "You think you're Luca now?" The insult spread faster than the fight. "You think you're Luca" became code for anyone pretending to be untouchable. Even the teachers noticed. In the staff lounge, Ms. Keller whispered, "I think the Valenti boy scares them." Mr. Grant replied quietly, "No. He scares us." Brent didn't show up that day. His locker sat empty, the dented metal door hanging open. Some said he'd transferred. Others said his father had pulled him out to avoid further problems. No one knew for sure. No one asked. But his absence didn't bring relief. It brought something worse, the understanding that the balance of power had shifted permanently. Without raising his voice, without throwing a punch, Luca had undone years of hierarchy with a week of patience. He became the name whispered under breath, the ghost that replaced the bully. At lunch, Luca sat in his usual spot by the window, reading. The cafeteria stayed unusually quiet. People gave him space now, not out of respect, but survival. A group of juniors at the next table stared, thinking he couldn't hear. "His family's got men everywhere. My cousin said they own the shipping company down by the docks." "No way. I heard his dad killed a senator." The absurdity didn't bother him. Lies were armor. They protected the truth. He folded the page of his book and set it down, gazing out the window. The Rolls-Royce was parked where it always was. Silvio leaned against it, sunglasses glinting in the sunlight, expression unreadable. A flash of camera light from across the street caught Luca's eye, a student trying to take another photo. Luca met the lens head-on. The student froze, then turned and left. When Luca looked away, the world seemed to look with him. By the final bell, even the bravest voices had gone quiet. The hallways felt empty, as though sound itself was afraid to linger too long near him. In the library, he gathered his books and left without hurry, his footsteps echoing down the polished floor. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't proud. He was simply aware of how fragile fear was, how easy it was to control without touching it. For everyone else, Ridgeway had become a rumor that fed on itself. But for Luca, it was something else entirely. It was a lesson. Power didn't need noise. It only needed patience. And as he stepped outside into the fading daylight, where Silvio waited beside the car, Luca realized something with quiet certainty. He didn't have to be the son of a Mafia boss to be feared. He only had to remind people that sometimes silence carries a louder message than any threat ever could. By Friday, the storm finally broke. The day began like a held breath, too quiet, too heavy, too calm to trust. The hallways of Ridgeway High felt wrong, stretched thin by tension that clung to every step. Conversations ended when Luca passed. Even laughter, the last survivor of normalcy, had gone extinct. Brent Dalton didn't care. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. His reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. Red eyes, twitching jaw, the dull glaze of someone who'd been living off adrenaline and resentment. He'd lost everything. His friends, his name, his crown. And every time he saw Luca walk past, serene, unreadable, it was like being erased a little more. That morning, something inside him cracked. He slammed his locker door shut and whispered to himself, "He's not better than me." He's not. By lunch, the cafeteria was packed. Students huddled in groups, whispering theories about the mysterious Rolls-Royce still parked outside. The fear in the air was thick enough to taste. Then the doors burst open. Brent stood there, breathing hard, hands shaking, not from fear, but fury. His voice tore through the silence like glass shattering. "Valenti!" Every head turned. Forks clattered onto trays. "You think you can ruin my life and get away with it?" he shouted, his voice cracking halfway through. "You think you can hide behind your name, your daddy, and that freak in a suit?" No one moved. At the far end of the room, Luca looked up from his table. His lunch was untouched, his expression unchanged. Slowly, he set down his fork, wiped his hands with a napkin, and stood. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He simply straightened, the gray light from the windows catching the faint shine of the pendant around his neck. "I told you once," Luca said evenly, his voice low but clear, "I don't want trouble." Brent laughed, but it came out hollow. Too late for that. He stormed forward, every step echoing, chairs scraped, phones came out, students recording, half terrified, half hungry for what was coming. Luca didn't move. When Brent reached him, his hand rose, trembling with rage. And then it stopped. A larger hand, strong, precise, unyielding, had caught his wrist mid-swing. The suited man stood between them, his black tie perfectly in place, his eyes calm and unreadable. The air around him seemed to drop in temperature. "Don't," Silvio said softly. Brent tried to pull free. The grip tightened, not crushing, but absolute. "You're making a mistake," Silvio continued, his tone polite, almost courteous. "My employer's son doesn't like trouble." "Neither do I." Brent's mouth went dry. He could feel the man's strength in that simple hold, controlled, deliberate, terrifying. This wasn't someone who fought for dominance. This was someone who ended it. For a long, suspended second, no one breathed. Then Silvio let go. Brent stumbled back, clutching his wrist, his defiance bleeding out of him. Luca took a step forward. His gaze met Brent's. Not angry, not smug, just steady, the kind of look that saw through pride and pretension and straight into the smallness behind it. "You still think I'm weak?" he asked quietly. Brent's lips parted, but no words came. His chest rose and fell fast, his bravado collapsing under the weight of the silence that followed. Luca's tone didn't change. "I told you before, I don't want trouble. But you keep looking for it." He paused, his voice turning colder, sharper. "Be careful what you find." Then he turned, sat back down, and resumed his lunch as though nothing had happened. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft clink of Luca's fork against his plate. Brent looked around, desperate for someone to back him up. No one did. His own crew stared at the floor. Even the teachers by the doorway froze, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of whatever this was. The silence grew unbearable. Luca didn't look up again. He didn't have to. The entire cafeteria was watching him now, not out of curiosity but reverence. Brent backed away slowly, his face pale, his hands shaking. "This isn't over," he muttered, but even he didn't believe it. He turned and left. The doors swung shut behind him, leaving a vacuum that no one dared fill. Outside, the Rolls-Royce engine purred to life. Silvio stood by the open door, watching through the glass as Luca finished his meal. When Luca finally stepped out, Silvio gave a faint nod. "Handled," he said. Luca adjusted his hoodie, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was never about handling him?" Silvio raised an eyebrow. "Then what was it about?" Luca looked back at the school, his eyes colder than before. "Teaching everyone else what silence means." The bodyguard said nothing. He just opened the car door. As Luca slid into the back seat, a ripple of unease spread through the cafeteria window watchers. They saw him only for a moment. The quiet boy framed by tinted glass, face unreadable, posture calm. The car pulled away. No one spoke for nearly a minute after it disappeared down the road. Because at that moment, everyone in Ridgeway High understood something terrifyingly simple. Power didn't always need fists, or shouts, or threats. Sometimes it sat quietly in the corner, eating lunch, and owned the entire room. Friday morning arrived with the weight of a storm that hadn't yet broken. The sky was bruised gray, the air thick enough to feel. Ridgeway High was quieter than ever. No laughter, no gossip, just the electric tension of a place that knew something was coming but couldn't name it. Then, at 10:23 a.m., the silence split. Two black SUVs rolled to a stop in front of the school. The engines didn't roar, they purred, low and steady, like something alive and patient. The doors opened at once. Men in black suits stepped out first. No sunglasses, no smiles. Their movements were too synchronized, too precise. Each one scanned the courtyard with the awareness of someone used to guarding something, or someone, worth more than the building itself. Then the final door opened. Don Vittorio Valenti stepped out. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. Every second of his movement was deliberate. A man carved from age and authority, silver hair slicked back, a dark wool coat draped over his shoulders, and in his right hand, a polished black cane tipped with silver. His eyes, gray and still, carried a gravity that silenced everything around him. Even the wind seemed to pause. Without a word, the men fell into step behind him. The double doors opened before he even reached them. Inside, the cafeteria froze mid-breath. Forks hovered in the air. A single chair creaked. The smell of breakfast trays and floor polish mixed with the cold perfume of power that followed the dawn inside. He didn't glance at the students. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room, slow, composed, terrifying in its calm. The teachers near the door tried to speak, but found their voices locked in their throats. At the far end of the cafeteria, Luca sat at his usual table, his tray untouched, his hands folded neatly. He didn't rise. He didn't have to. The Don's cane clicked once against the tile. Tap, tap, tap. Each step measured, each sound echoing in rhythm with the collective heartbeat of the room. When he reached Luca, he stopped beside him. His eyes shifted, slow and deliberate, to Brent Dalton, who sat 3 tables away, pale as chalk. The Don's voice, when it came, was quiet. Too quiet for how deeply it carried. "I sent my son here to learn humility," he said, "to live among good children, to understand the world beyond our gates." He paused, his cane pressing lightly against the floor. "Instead," he continued softly, "he met cruelty." Brent's throat constricted. His chair scraped backward. He stood, trembling, his hands clutching the table edge to keep from falling. "Sir," he started, voice cracking. But the Don lifted a hand. The sound stopped him cold. The room felt colder now. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to retreat. "Do you know what I value most, ragazzo?" the Don asked, turning slightly toward Brent. "Respect. Not the kind that comes from fear, but the kind earned through decency." He let the word hang there, heavy as judgment. Brent could barely look up. The tremor in his jaw betrayed him. "I failed, perhaps," the Don murmured, "for I thought the world outside my home still taught decency." Then his gaze shifted to Luca. "My son," he said, "tell me. What do you wish I do, figlio mio?" The room collectively exhaled, as if waiting for a verdict. Even Luca's teachers leaned forward unconsciously. Luca rose slowly. The quiet confidence that had unsettled Ridgeway all week now seemed to crystallize into something larger, the reflection of his father's authority, but tempered by his own calm. He met his father's gaze, voice steady. "Nothing, Papa," he said. "I already taught him." For a heartbeat, the Don said nothing. Then his lips curved, not into a smile, but something rarer. Pride. "Ben." He turned back to Brent, stepping close enough that the young man could see his reflection in the Don's silver-tipped cane. "Then my lesson," he said, "is complete." He raised the cane, not as a weapon, but as a seal. He tapped Brent's shoulder once, light, almost tender. "Remember this mercy," the Don whispered. "It's the last one you'll ever get." Brent nodded without speaking. His knees almost buckled. The Don's men stepped aside as their leader turned, his coat brushing the edge of Luca's chair. Without another glance, he began to walk back toward the exit. His bodyguards followed, perfectly timed, the sound of their footsteps echoing like a procession. As the doors opened and the cold daylight poured in, the Don paused once more. He didn't turn his head, just spoke over his shoulder. "You raised your eyes to a Valenti once," he said. "Be grateful they're still yours to see with." Then he stepped into the light, his silhouette swallowed by it. The doors closed behind him. No one spoke for a full minute. The students stared at Luca, still standing in silence, his face unreadable. He picked up his tray, calmly collected his things, and walked out through the same doors his father had just passed through. When the sound of his footsteps faded, the room finally breathed again, shaky, uneven, alive with awe and fear. Someone whispered, barely audible, "That was his dad?" Another voice answered, trembling, "That wasn't a dad. That was a king." At the front of the cafeteria, Brent remained frozen, eyes wide, hands trembling on the edge of the table. A single drop of sweat rolled down his cheek and hit the floor with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. He sank slowly into his chair, staring at the spot where the Don had stood. Outside, the black SUVs began to move, and with them, the balance of Ridgeway High shifted forever. For the rest of the day, no one dared to say Luca's name out loud. It didn't need to be spoken. It was written in silence, the kind that commands, warns, and endures. By sunset, the story was already spreading through the city like smoke. Not about the Don's arrival, not about Brent, not even about the words that had been said. Just one simple truth. The son of Don Valenti didn't rule through fear. He inherited it. The next day, Ridgeway High felt like a cathedral after confession. Quiet, reverent, uneasy. The echoes of the Don's footsteps still lingered in the halls. Every sound seemed smaller, every whisper cautious. The air carried both awe and relief, the strange calm that follows a storm no one dared to predict. By morning, the rumors had already transformed into myth. Some said the Dawn owned the school now. Others claimed Brent had been sent away in the middle of the night, his family forced to move states. No one knew the truth, but no one wanted to test it. One thing was certain. Everything had changed. Teachers greeted Luca differently now, not with fear, but with a hesitant respect, like speaking to someone who'd seen a world they could only imagine. Students parted in the hallways when he walked through, eyes lowered, voices hushed. The laughter that once filled Ridgeway had been replaced by something else, a quiet recognition of power that didn't need to be loud. Brent didn't return that morning. His locker was empty, his nameplate gone. The space where he used to stand, surrounded by followers, laughter, chaos, was just another silent corner now. No one talked about him. No one wanted to. The king of Ridgeway had fallen, and the boy who replaced him didn't even ask for the crown. That afternoon, Luca sat alone in the courtyard. The autumn wind stirred the leaves around his shoes, carrying the faint scent of rain and metal. His jacket hung loosely on his shoulders, his hands resting on his knees. For the first time in days, there was no noise, no whispers, just peace. The kind that comes after a long silence earns its meaning. He didn't look up when the sound of polished shoes crossed the gravel behind him. Silvio stopped beside the bench, folding his hands behind his back. "It's over," he said. His tone carried no question, just quiet observation. Luca nodded slightly. "For them, maybe." Silvio studied him for a long moment. "You handled it well," he said finally. "Like a true Valenti." Luca smiled faintly, his eyes fixed on the distant edge of the schoolyard. "No," he said, "like someone who wants to live without fear." The bodyguard tilted his head, the corner of his mouth almost twitching into a smile. "And yet, fear follows you." "I can't change that," Luca replied, "but I can change what it means." He leaned back on the bench, letting the wind tug gently at his hair. For a moment, he looked younger, just a boy who wanted to be ordinary. But the calm in his eyes betrayed the truth. There was no going back. Inside the building, Principal Harris stood by the window, watching through half-drawn blinds. He saw the two figures in the courtyard, the young heir and his silent guardian, and exhaled slowly. "Power changes everything," he murmured. Ms. Keller, standing beside him, folded her arms. "Do you think he'll be all right?" Harris hesitated. "He's not the one I'm worried about." The final bell rang. Students rushed to their buses, their laughter hesitant, their glances quick. Every conversation still seemed to orbit around Luca, though none dared mention his name. He stayed where he was until the courtyard was empty. Silvio gestured toward the gate. "It's time." Luca stood, brushing dust from his hands. "He really came himself," he said quietly. "Papa never leaves the city." Silvio's expression softened. "He came because you didn't ask him to." They walked in silence toward the waiting car. The black Rolls-Royce gleamed under the pale light, the same car that had watched everything from a distance and never interfered, until it mattered. As Luca approached, the driver opened the rear door. He hesitated before getting in, glancing back one last time. Through the courtyard's glass doors, he could see faint reflections. The students who had mocked him, now watching in silence, the teachers pretending not to stare. The space where Brent once stood, now empty forever. He thought of all the lessons he'd learned that week, how cruelty unmasked itself, how fear could be turned into respect, how silence, when used well, could speak louder than any threat. He turned to Silvio. "Do you ever get tired of being watched?" Silvio adjusted his cufflinks, looking up at the school with a faint smile. "No, signorino. Watching is how we make sure nothing breaks that shouldn't. Luca nodded, the corner of his mouth curving slightly. Then I guess I'll have to learn that too. He slid into the back seat. The door closed with a soft, final click. The Rolls-Royce began to move, gliding down the narrow road that led away from Ridgeway High. The afternoon light washed over the windows, tinting the view gold and gray. Luca rested his head against the seat, eyes tracing the buildings as they faded behind him. His reflection stared back in the glass, half boy, half legacy. He knew he'd never truly escape who he was. The name Valenti carried a shadow too large to outrun. But as the school disappeared behind the curve of the street, he understood something his father had tried to teach him his whole life. Power wasn't about domination, it was about choice. And mercy, when shown by those who could destroy, carried more weight than any revenge. Silvio glanced in the rearview mirror. Your father will be pleased. Luca's eyes stayed on the horizon. I'm not sure he'll understand. Oh, he will, Silvio said. You reminded everyone why people fear the Valenti name. Luca's gaze hardened slightly. Then they learned the wrong lesson. Silvio raised an eyebrow. And what lesson should they have learned? That fear doesn't last, Luca replied quietly. Respect does. Silvio didn't answer. He didn't need to. The faintest hint of pride crossed his face before he turned his eyes back to the road. The car slowed at a red light. Outside, the fading sun lit the school sign in a soft amber glow. Ridgeway High School. Letters now carrying a story no one would forget. As the light turned green, the Rolls-Royce accelerated smoothly, disappearing into the city traffic. Inside, Luca watched the world blur past, streets, faces, lives untouched by the weight of his name. He closed his eyes and let the hum of the engine steady his thoughts. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even proud. He was simply resolved. He had inherited power, yes, but what he chose to do with it, that would define him. The car turned a corner and vanished from sight, leaving only the faint echo of tires on wet pavement. And for the first time in Ridgeway's history, silence meant safety. Sometimes, the loudest destruction is done without lifting a hand. If this story has your attention, hit that subscribe button and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Every story we tell connects the past to the present, and we'd love to have you with us for the next one.